Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's my pleasure to speak for a couple of minutes ahead of this panel about Cardiff University's Digital Transformation Innovation Institute. My name is Ingharad Watson. I'm the manager of the Innovation Institute, and we are the zone partners for digital transformation here at Wales Tech Week. We've been very excited to be part of Wales Tech Week because 2023 has been a really important year for Cardiff University. We've launched our 4 innovation institutes, of which digital transformation is one, but also we have the Innovation Institute for Net Zero, for security, crime and intelligence, and neuroscience and mental health. These institutes are strategic entities that are designed to bring together researchers within the university, together with businesses, public sector and third sector entities outside the university to catalyse our research for innovation and impact beyond Cardiff into Wales, UK and the world. This panel is particularly important to us as one of our key thematic interest areas is supply chain, as well as logistics, transport, healthcare, fintech, economy, creative industries and education. All of these interest areas are underpinned by expertise in AI, cybersecurity, data science, psychology, organizational research, and human-centric computing. In other words, we have the expertise to both make sure that your digital transformation is technologically sound and robust, but also to support your organization and getting people along with that digital transformation. At the heart of everything we do is responsible innovation and inclusive digital transformation, and we're very focused on co-production with our stakeholders and with all the people who may be affected by the digital transformation that we're taking part in. A key example of this, if you visit our stand, which is just along there, is that we're not just the Digital Transformation Innovation Institute, we're here also as the Hartree Centre Hub Cardiff, which is a 1.5 million initiative from UKRI to support SMEs in the region with their digital transformation in areas and technologies such as AI and data science. By this region, what we mean is Cardiff Capital Region and the Western Gateway region. So if you're an SME in that area, please do come along and have a chat to Louisa, our business liaison partner, who'll be happy to talk to you about the Hartree programme. I'm very pleased today that one of my colleagues, Yingli Wang, is chairing today's panel. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the panel to talk about supply chain and resilience for net zero future. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone. You do notice that sometimes it can be quite noisy, but there are gadgets on your chair, the flashing headset you can put on your head. Therefore, you can hear us more clearly if you want to try that. Hi, everybody. My name is Yingli Wang. I'm a professor in logistics and operations management at Cardiff University. So I'll be having the honor to moderate today's session. Now, we have about 45 minutes together. So I want this session to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions about net zero, supply chain resilience, or sustainability, please, get your questions ready. The way that we're going to organize this is we are going to ask the panel member to introduce themselves, and then I will have a few questions to throw at them. Afterwards, halfway through, we would very much open up the floor to all of you. So do get in and get involved in asking questions and discussions. Today the topic is about building resilient and sustainable supply chain for net zero. And we know that there is this urgent need for the supply chain to be more resilient, therefore to cope with a lot of uncertainties that are coming our way. In the past few years, we have had like roller coaster years, right? From Brexit, COVID, to global shortage on food, toilet papers, emergencies that we experience, lots of things like that. So therefore, our supply chains are incredibly, kind of being pressed in terms of building their resilience. But at the same time, we cannot improve our resilience, but harm our environment. So we have this dual objective that we have to build a resilient and sustainable supply chain. So this is what today is about. So hopefully through the panel discussion, we're going to have a much deeper understanding about the challenges, opportunities that come in this space. So we are incredibly lucky to have 4 industry experts that sit in our panel. Let me just quickly introduce their name, and then I'll pass on for them to say a bit more about themselves and their organizations. So we have Sarah Dickins over there, journalist, producer at BBC, also has her own business. We have Juan Perez, from CEO and co-founder at Finboot. We also have Anna Roberts, Head of Market Development at Ieuan. That means Internet of Value 42. Okay. And finally, we have Juan Rosa, CEO at Freight Logistics Solutions. So over to you.
Thank you, Yingli. So yeah, I'm Juan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Finboot. We're a technology company that focuses on accelerating and facilitating the adoption of blockchain in industrial ecosystems. We work a lot with capital-intensive and difficult to decarbonize industries like oil and gas, chemicals, and steel, just helping them map out their entire value chain and substantiate their sustainability credentials with evidence-backed data. We work with market leaders like Repsol, who's a global multi-energy provider, SABIC, who's one of the world's largest chemical manufacturers, and other clients in these key industries to kind of just help them accelerate not only their adoption of digital, but their adoption of digital aligned with their sustainability strategies. Happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. When I was invited to be here, I didn't realize I'd be feeling like I was in a giant white bouncy castle. So very excited to be with you all. I work for IOV 42. We have quite a similar business to Juan at Finboot. We've built novel distributed ledger technology, which has been applied to help organizations with product traceability. Slightly different sectors. We work with Tata Steel just down the road looking at steel traceability. We work in the halal industry. We've got one of our partners at the back there. But the thing that we're really passionate about here when we're talking about net zero is the deforestation space. So we work with a lot of organizations who are having to prove to their customers and regulators that the products that they're buying and selling are not linked to deforestation. What's the link between that and net zero? It's quite shocking. There are now some tropical forests that emit more carbon than they sequester. And there are some reports by The Economist that says that deforestation can contribute to around 30% of man-made global greenhouse gas emissions. So if we can try and solve that issue, it's going to be very, very helpful at helping the whole planet get to net zero.
Hi, everyone. Ieuan Rosa, CEO and founder of Freight Logistics Solutions. Freight Logistics Solutions are a digital freight business specializing in road transportation. I guess I've been through it and built quite a scaled supply chain. We've got 14,000 hauliers engaged with FLS. So they're using our technology, our app, our platform, ultimately telling my transport planners where their vehicles are, when they're empty, and where they want to go. I offer up this data then to manufacturers to give them scalability, flexibility in the way that they use road transportation. Also a complete digitalized way of working with carbon tracking for every load that they do. I think from my experience, most manufacturers have the scope 1 and 2 direct emissions as part of their business plan. They've got the reporting underway. They've got the activities aligned to strive to reduce that. I think when we speak about scope 3 emissions, which is the indirect emissions, that comes with more challenge. 90% of these indirect emissions are from logistics, the movements of goods in and out of premises. And then again, if I use my experience of speaking with hauliers, we've got quite a bit of challenge. Some hauliers haven't got the technology or the capability to start the reporting. But then actually when you get into the activities to strive to reduce carbon, things like EV vehicles, alternative fuel, multimodal, use of rail, The challenges are generally cost, cost for output, cost of investment, and also the infrastructure in place. I'm passionate that a scale supply chain alongside a data and technology approach is essential to get to net zero. But not only that, at the minute, UK and EU governments are reporting that 30% of all road freight mileage is actually driven empty. I mean, that's a shocking stat, really, of how much empty mileage and carbon emissions are out there. I think by this way of working, of this scale supply chain data technology, actually attacks this immediately with a kind of simple mantra of lower miles, lower fuel, lower cost, lower carbon, and that's something that Freight Logistics Solutions we're really trying to push. Look forward to the discussions and any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sarah. My name is Sarah Dickins. For more than 25 years, I reported on the very fast-changing economy of the UK and Europe for the BBC across the UK and also here in Wales. So I kind of started off, if you like, with all the pits in Wales gradually closing. Then I saw the Japanese manufacturing consumer electronics coming. Then I saw them going again, and was until last year still reporting as a correspondent. I forgot to say that bit. Charting very much the change in our economy here in Wales. So I've kind of been at the, you could say, coalface, of course, and that would all be too corny. But I've been like on so many shop floors for 25 years, talking to people about change, what they're trying to aim to do, how it impacts systems, but also how it impacts individuals. And I suppose I came to the decision that instead of talking about other people doing it, I wanted to do something myself. And so I left the BBC, which gave them a bit of a surprise, I think, at the end of last year. I'm now a sustainable economics advisor, working with a whole range of people across the economy who are trying to decarbonise, trying to change, and I'm helping them, hopefully, getting over the barriers to that change. So I'm working with farmers, I'm working in the food sector, I'm working in heavy manufacturing right across the piece, basically to help people enable the change they want to do. And to me, the supply chain is absolutely fascinating because I've seen from previous changes, previous recessions, how a decision up here can impact the small company that supplies along the way. And that's the passion that makes me get up very early in the morning.
Thanks, everybody. So I'll start off by probably ask you, Juan, the question about the current landscape in terms of net zero supply chain sustainability. So how would you evaluate the current state of supply chains in terms of sustainability and also their readiness to align with the network and net zero goals?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm going to start us off with the bad news, let's say, and then with some of the positive signs. And the big element of the bad news is that we are behind, right? So when it comes to the road to net zero, when it comes to 2050 and certainly 2030 targets, we are significantly behind in our energy transition, right? After COVID, oil demand just started to go back up. Peak oil demand is not expected until 2024. So we certainly have a lot of work that we need to do, particularly when it comes to decarbonizing the supply chain, right? The good news is that there's already some indicators that said, okay, companies have started to take this seriously, not only because the targets that they are releasing or getting themselves to, but actually because of the work that they are doing to truly decarbonize their processes, right? As I mentioned earlier, we work a lot in oil and gas and chemicals, which typically, again, they are somewhat responsible for a lot of these emissions. And some of our clients are already implementing changes to their infrastructure, to their industrial processes to make sure that their emissions are significantly reduced, right? And they do that mostly by introducing technology, and they introduce technology from an industrial aspect, meaning, okay, how can I take more advantage of waste to produce some energy products? But they also do so looking at digital technologies, right? Because digital technologies essentially will help them meter, will help them track, will help them collect the evidence and the information that they require in order to substantiate or to provide evidence of the changes that they're making in their industrial facilities, right? And I think this is key, right? So one of our implementations is around circular polymers. So how can I essentially track and map out the entire supply chain and be able to connect, okay, if I go to the supermarket and I grab any product that is made out of plastic packaging or that has plastic packaging, can I have the, let's say, resilient data evidence that tells me this plastic packaging was done with mixed plastic waste collected from the Cardiff municipality, for example, right? And these are some of the initiatives that we're starting to see. A lot of this is on the early days, but some of them have started already to scale up, right? And I think the main reason we're seeing this acceleration or this scaling is because it's not just kind of a responsibility that we have towards the environment. Of course, that is a big driver, but there's also a tremendous opportunity when it comes to the move to net zero, right? So we need to understand that, again, all of these companies, all of these organizations, they're taking these steps because A, we have a responsibility to do so, but B, let's face it, in the system that we work, they are doing so because there's a huge opportunity for them to gain value of this new economic system, right? One that we require, but one that will effectively bring a lot of value to those early adopters and early movers into the ecosystem.
Thanks, Juan. That is a very good point. I think, when it comes to understand where are we now, right? If we are going to be able to reduce half our carbon by half by 2030, right? Where are we now? Are we doing good? Are we still on track, or we kind of, really there is this narrow window that is closing up and we're losing our time. So I think there is a lot of sense making, and from what we see, there is a lot of progress being made. But along the way, there are also many opportunities and barriers. And as any of you, if you're from supply chain, you probably know how hard it is to decarbonize your supply chain while still remain resilient. So my next question, I'm going to direct to Anna. Let's talk about barriers and the problems and the issues that come along the way when it comes to supply chain sustainability and net zero goals.
Yeah, thank you. I think you could spend the whole 45 minutes talking about the barriers and the obstacles, and there are loads. For instance, we spoke this morning in your first session, Sarah, about awareness. How do we ensure that the entire ecosystem, back to your tier 7, 8 upstream suppliers, how aware are they of what net zero means and how it impacts their business and all of their customers? So I think awareness and education about how we're trying to solve these things is a big gap. I think another one is regulation, and joined up regulation that doesn't solve the issue in one area and pushes it elsewhere. I think we're coming on to talk about regulation. The one that lies closest to my heart, and if you remember one thing about IOV42, it's that trust. We think trust is really, really important and can be a big barrier to making things happen. It lies really, it's the engine at the heart of a data economy. So if you think about net zero decarbonisation, and the same applies for child labour claims or CSR reporting, companies are having more and more to disclose information about their scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, their carbon footprint at various points along their supply chain. Depending on the size of the company, that involves ridiculously huge amounts of data. So how is all of this data going to be collected, stored, shared, distributed, etc.? That's a really big challenge to do that at scale. I think Russell in the morning session spoke about a Boeing 747 having over 1 million different component parts. How can you make trustworthy claims about all of those parts is really difficult. So we're really looking at how can you create more accountability? How do you create more integrity and authenticity in data that is shared so that you can make a decision whether you trust a product or a claim made about it? So I think trust is a really big challenging thing. Supply chains COVID might have changed things a little bit, but supply chains are incredibly globalized, they're incredibly fragile and complicated. And without trust, it's just not really going to work, unfortunately.
Thanks. That's a very good point. And when we talk about trust, we talk about, the whole ecosystem together in the supply chain. We talk about anything that's beyond your tier one suppliers, including your third party logistics service providers and a number of others. We literally talk about many, many, many different organizations that all work together that try to deliver this decarbonization kind of agenda. And therefore, when we talk about supply chain ecosystem, we often talk about that people need to collaborate. But we all know that for us to collaborate together, and there got to be some instruments and mechanisms in place. I think what Anna was saying is there are some digital technologies behind that can facilitate that kind of dialogue and the trust building process. So my next question is going to be directed to Ieuan. I think you are from the freight logistics sector. You have been there for 20 years or so. So what do you think about the collaboration and partnership? How we can facilitate this cross-industry collaboration that could then contribute positively to this network zero journey that we are on?
Thank you. I think when we talk about collaboration, it's obviously the heartbeat, isn't it? It's everything when you're kind of striving towards net zero. I can only allude to the experiences that I've got within my business. I think one of the collaborations we had to get in initially was our supply chain, the hauliers. So the first thing we had to show is that we could make those guys more money. We could mitigate their empty mileage. We could fill their backloads. That's the initial engagement. I think the second part of that was the technology that we adopted. We made sure that the app and the platform was almost felt like something you'd experience market-wide, not something difficult and specific to use to try and get that engagement. That was one of the key kind of collaborations we had to do with our supply chain. I think the other key points for me is that the trade bodies and government is really important for the collaboration. For us, we align ourselves to manufacturing trade bodies as well as transport trade bodies, just to make sure that we get those pinch points across. And that could be as simple as why people are not adopting certain technologies or not adopting certain ways of working. But we see that as a key part. I think the pushback of vehicle production was a bit of a blow. That extra couple of years, I think that doesn't give the right messaging. But without being too political, I think that continued push from trade bodies is really important. My final point on collaboration, I think it's that just on an order by order basis, because we're all talking long-term views, but I think there's things that we can do immediately. So when that kind of order by order basis, we look at the shipper, the buyer, and the logistics business all working closely together to look at the most cost effective, of course, because that comes first. The timely transportation, but also the sustainability aspect that can come onto that order by order process and make a real difference there. Thank you.
Sorry, no, if I may add something real quick, it's just that Ieuan touched on something that I think is very key, and it's the fact that we oftentimes see the developments or investments in sustainability and the road to net zero as conflicting with operational efficiency, right? And you were discussing with us an example that is really good, that is to say, hey, actually, I was driving cost savings, I was being more optimum, I was being more efficient for my clients, and then as a consequence of that, we were also reducing their emissions, right? And we were able to provide them with more data. So I think one of the game changers that we need to start looking and basically understanding and working more towards them is the fact that actually, look, operational efficiency and sustainability, they come hand in hand, right? And the more we see that and the more we commit to that, the sooner we'll be able to accelerate our transition.
That's a very good point. Often there is a misperception saying if we do green, then we have to sacrifice our economic gains. Of course, there will be investments needed, but longer term, there are many successful examples in practice saying, right, if you become greener, actually you become better economically as well. But of course, and we are operating in this large ecosystem, and sometimes if we look at beyond our immediate supply chain actor, that we look, for instance, the role of regulations and standardizations, and they play a significant role as well. So on that point, I would like to bring Sarah in. So Sarah, what do you think? How can policymakers encourage and incentivize business to adopt green practices?
Well, I think one of the things that policymakers really can do and need to do is to give reassurance to people. So if you're, quite a long way down the supply chain and your main supplier, let's say it's a big company, is saying, we need you to change because of our tier 3, you might be quite scared about that because you don't know if that big, customer of yours is crazy or whether they're on the right track. And you could change your production methods, your ingredients or whatever to fulfill their criteria. They might be wrong, they might go bust, and then where are you? You're left. So I think that's an important role for policymakers, is to reassure people about change and to organize that, when I say people, I mean businesses, particularly smaller ones, that yes, you might be making plastic yogurt pots now, but we can help you. And actually, look, there are going to be lots of other people other than your main customer who would quite like a cardboard yogurt pot or whatever. You can tell I've been a journalist. I keep things very simple, but you know what I mean. You get the drift. So I think that's a real role for policymakers. I also think that something that we haven't brought in yet is the customer and brand. And quite frankly, you only need to think of Finisterre, Patagonia, Hyatt jeans in cardigan, various brands, and they're not all high-end, where actually people are buying from them and spending a bit more. I mean, look at Body Shop. That's been around about 30 years, hasn't it? Because they believe in it. And Body Shop buyers, when they were buying their cocoa butter 20 years ago, weren't looking for a trademark or a standardization or a regulation or proof. I think sometimes we guys get hung up with the proof, but customers get a whiff of the brand. And as long as that brand is not found out to be doing something terrible with child labour somewhere, then that brand can really help drive change. But obviously, at the same time, when you've got companies having now to calculate and report their impact on the planet, obviously for those companies, that verification's needed. But ultimately, I really think, and I might not have said this 20 years ago, but I really think it's the customers that are driving it. Why are Volvo only wanting green steel now? Because Volvo drivers want to feel good about driving a Volvo that they know is cleaner than that car over there. And I think that might be the thing that helps drive real change.
If I can just add something and tell a story from the client world that I operate in, which is in the deforestation business mainly. There's several regulations, EU deforestation regulation, which starts 30th of December 2024, UK Environment Act Schedule 17, which isn't yet as far forward in terms of enforcement, but all of them are asking for traceability of your product, about the organizations that you're buying from, all the way back to source. So that's the regulation, and the burden to comply with that sits on the operators or the importers within Europe. So they're gradually getting their heads around it. But I'm not seeing a huge amount done by the policymakers over here in Europe and the UK to help production countries. So all of the timber that's going into you probably all buy flat pack furniture from a big Scandinavian store, and it's probably got some composite part in from Vietnam. There's very little being done to support the producer nations to help with this compliance of the regulation. And the reality is, unless we're joined up globally, sometimes it's too hard. If I'm being asked by Volvo to supply green steel, but I'm not being incentivized by Volvo to do that, am I just going to supply countries and buyers in other parts of the world where the regulation isn't asking me to do that? So I think one of the gaps we're seeing in regulation is it's well-meaning, but it's not necessarily joined up, which actually means it might have the exact opposite impact than it's trying to achieve.
Thanks, Anna. That's a very good point made. Well, when we talk about the legislation or regulations coming to the sustainability space, there are so many of those, and the different countries will have different rules, regulations, and if you operate globally, and it's really a minefield, I have to say. So, but fortunately, there are some what we call the system enablers, those are technologies and things that and emerging intermediaries, even the new business models, etc., that are on the way try to address those complexities. So before I send my next question to the panel, I would like to ask the audience to think about, when it comes to decarbonization, when it comes to supply chain resilience, what is on your mind? What sort of questions do you have? What are the burning issues that keep you awake at night? So think about it. And then when we finish our last round of questions, I'll come to you and get your questions Friday. So my final round of the question to the panel, I think so very much about enablers, particularly from a technology perspective. We are at Wales Tech. And right, this is sort of remit of the week. So let's talk about tech. So technology advancement. What do you think? In what ways the emerging technologies and digital solutions can play a pivotal role to accelerate our carbon journey, to accelerate our sustainability journey? So who wants to have a go first?
Thank you. So yeah, I think as we've been saying, right, digital technologies are of huge help to essentially guarantee or provide the evidence that this transition requires, right? And to kind of say, okay, how can this help? I'll just go to a very practical example of where it really is required, right? So we, as I said, we've been working with Repsol, who's a global multi-energy provider. One of the initiatives that we have is on fuel traceability. And this is on some of their low carbon fuels, right? And this is a kind of very innovative transition type of alternative known as HVO, which is essentially a net zero emissions fuel. The challenge with this is that it's got a huge positive, which is it's compatible with the existing infrastructure, it's compatible with the existing fleet, but then that also makes it prone to, okay, how can you make sure you validate or that you are demonstrating that you're burning the net zero fuel as opposed to the traditional one, right? So all that goes back to traceability, right? We need to then trace the production of that fuel, because what makes it net zero emissions is what happens at the production side. All of that information needs to be captured. You need to trace the distribution of that fuel, okay, from where it got produced to where it gets consumed. How did it change hands? In the terms of logistics, there's a lot of a very complex chain of custody in the fuel value chain. And then you need to trace the consumption, right? At the vehicle end, okay, who is burning that fuel? How are they doing so? And make sure that they're not introducing the traditional fuel into their vehicles, right? So traceability here is key, is required. You wouldn't be able to prove this decarbonization unless you have digital traceability in place. And this is one of those kind of examples where, okay, look, there's a really attractive alternative that is really going to help us accelerate that energy transition in a realistic way, because some other alternatives are not as viable. But yet I have the plan and I have the data to back up this evidence, right? So I think, look, that's one example. And as I said, we've worked in a number of different very difficult to decarbonize industry segments where we've already launched these ecosystems. We're already tracing those products, and essentially technology has proven to give a positive impact, or to have a positive impact when it comes to the road to net zero, but it also gives a positive impact when it comes to the business impact that the solutions may have. So yeah, I'll leave it there, and I'll let Anna add to it.
Yeah, thank you. And a disclaimer, I do work for a technology company, but I don't think technology is a silver bullet. I think no one technology by itself is going to solve anything. And certainly technology without behavioral change and mindset to solve some of these problems, it's just not going to happen. In terms of what Juan was talking about with digital traceability, I think for us, one of the really quick wins we see for organizations on a path to decarbonisation or net zero is thinking about how they are collecting, securely sharing and storing data. So often what people are having to share or pass down the chain contains really commercially sensitive information about who you're buying from and sometimes even pricing. And we'll ask a lot of our clients, what are you currently doing in terms of digital traceability? And they'll say, yeah, we've got a pretty good digital traceability system. You say, so how are you collecting the data? WhatsApp. Our suppliers send us messages with pictures of the invoices and pictures of the bills of lading and all of that. And we think, okay, and what do you do with it? We've got our digital Excel system that we're putting all of this into. And that's not to mock our suppliers. They are trying really, really hard, but these are the tools, this is the skills that they have available to them that has worked up to now, but we don't think that that is going to scale. So thinking about how can we build confidence, trust again, and reassurance into collection and sharing, importantly sharing of really confidential information often. So that's what I think it comes down to.
Just a couple of points from me. I think the HVO thing is interesting. I think, excuse me, a lot of hauliers are looking at this to adopt this. There's still the cost challenge, though, that even with adopting HVO, there's a cost to the consumer. So it's getting that incentive for the consumer to really work with this fuel. I think on the technology side, you're absolutely right. I think for us, when we're reporting the carbon, when we're giving live tracking to manufacturers, this is a real kind of game changer, which is enable them to adopt a kind of digitalized solution to the way that they're working. But it's not a single business doing it alone. It's someone that all businesses need to adopt this way of working. And like it or not, the data approach is going to be needed across the supply chain and the way that we work.
Only to say really quickly that I'm quite blown away by some of the technological changes that have been. I mean, for instance, I love the fact, the idea that carbon can be captured and turned into dresses for Zara. And the company is in Wales, that blows my head. That's just fantastic. Just imagine wearing a dress with, this was made from carbon on the back. So cool. So I think, there are huge changes that technology is enabling, which is great. But I think one of the biggest challenges is behavioral change, because that can just really slow it up or divert it up an alleyway. And that's why it's a real shame and I think it's beginning to feel a bit like that, if net zero and decarbonisation is politicised, because that will really start muddling up the whole thing and messing around with lots of the amazing things that you guys do.
Thanks, Arabose. That was really, really interesting discussions. Now, I'm going to open up the question to the floor. So anybody, if you got any question to ask our panel?
I think you've all mentioned so far the need for using data to identify what carbon capture and how you're going to improve the supply chain. But how do you factor in the cost of storing the data and manipulating it?
Who wants to have a go?
I'll first kind of confirm if I heard the question correctly. So you were mentioning, the importance of capturing data in order to achieve this traceability, and how do we factor in the cost of data? And I presume you mean basically the digital infrastructure for storage and so on. Yeah. I think, look, it's also a challenge, right? And you look at the energy consumption of global data centers and the scaling of these data centers, because we store more and more data by the minute, but there are alternatives to that, right? So most of the big players are moving into renewable energy sources, which in turn it kind of creates a loop because they also need to trace where that renewable energy is coming from. But that's super important, and kind of accelerating that move is critical, right? There is, again, we work on blockchain. One of the kind of challenges of blockchain is that, okay, it's a decentralized technology, but that means you're replicating data in different nodes. That creates a redundant, let's say, element there that is there for a reason from a traceability and a technical angle, but then it means that it consumes more energy, right? So again, in that field, you also have different protocols and networks that are net zero or that are moving to net zero and have a realistic plan to do that, right? So I think you're absolutely right. There is a cost to basically maintain that infrastructure, but the benefits that come in the way that is compensating the physical transition they basically outweigh that challenge, right?
I think if I give from personal experience, that's the biggest cost for us. To get the technology and the infrastructure in place to hold the data. I took a commercial view on that actually, because by me holding the data and having the data warehouse, I can make this more cost effective for manufacturers. So there's a rise of digitalized based businesses that have spent a lot of money on that kind of data capture, which then enables the manufacturers or the shippers of good. But there's no hiding place. It's a costly exercise.
Anybody else from the floor? Any questions?
Thank you very much. I'm Andy Jones from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. One of the things that I think about a lot and worries me is whether the term net zero is useful or not. So I was just reading a few weeks back, one of the top 10 companies in the FTSE invested 400 million in planting trees to increase the net zero balance that they have. Now, I would argue strongly they'd be better off spending 400 million trying to decarbonize and encourage circularity in their operations. But we continue to talk about net zero, and for me, there are two things here. You can reduce the things that you do that have a bad environmental impact, or you can do something over that says we carry on doing the bad thing, but oh look, we're doing this good thing as well. Now, I don't want to stop people doing good things, but I still think that the concept that we talk about in terms of net zero, so would we be better off changing the conversation to decarbonisation and circularity?
Absolutely. I think with the activities that's undertaken, one of my main things today is about reducing carbon emissions now, not those kind of activities that kind of look at different things, like you said, with spending the money on planted trees. It's activities that can reduce your carbon emissions immediately. So I absolutely agree with you.
I think a good starting point is circularity, and like going into any organisation and our own lives really, and saying, where's the waste? Do I need 10 black jackets that all look the same? That kind of thing in our own lives. But every organisation to do that. To really reduce the waste, then involve a more circular approach to everything that you do. And then obviously there's going to be carbon left over. And, there are other ways to offset your carbon than planting trees. And there's different ways of planting trees, like indigenous ones here in Wales or ones in Brazil. So I think, we're going to see more and more interesting and positive ways of offsetting carbon. But of course, it's not a black and white, it's all right. I mean, interestingly, we had a very frustrating thing where we farm and we've got a carbon positive farm and it's all red meat. So that's quite unusual. And we have people that come and stay. And someone came and stayed and they said, we're in your area because our kids gave us 2 sequoias, Californian sequoia trees for Christmas. And we're going to plant them just outside Abergavenny, and that will deal with our carbon for the rest of our lives. And I couldn't help myself. Without thinking, I said, oh, great. So you can fly wherever you like and your conscience is salved. And they said, yes, isn't it great? Obviously, we don't want that. But I think it's the mixture of the two. And I think as the time goes by, we'll be much more clever about ways of offsetting carbon than conifers in Llandilo or somewhere.
Yeah, I think the same way that you think. It's the same with carbon neutral, which I heard last week will be phased out as a term because it's so misleading. I'd be so disappointed if people tried to offset their way to net zero. It's all, even with circularity, you should be designing for whole life right at that very first manufacturing process. The circular bit at the end becomes much easier to crack if you're building it into those design principles at the beginning.
And in fact, we're talking about And in fact, we're talking about that circularity tomorrow here, so come back.
Well, thanks very much. I think that's a very, very good point. When we talk about net zero and sustainability, we need to think through the whole life cycle from design to purchase to manufacture to reuse, repurpose, remanufacturing, and recycle the whole life cycle. That needs really a systematic approach to that. So on that note, unfortunately, we run out of time. So I'm going to ask our panel one final question. I'm going to ask them to give everybody a piece of advice if they can only give one piece of advice, and what would that be they would like for you to take home and act upon?
Yeah, so I guess from my end, it will be, look, it's not that difficult, and there's already some success stories out there. And if you want to learn more about the ones I mentioned, you can find us basically all the way on the other side of the building, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that.
So I'm not an expert in net zero, but I've asked clients of ours this same question. And I think their advice to people wanting to start out on a sustainability or a net zero journey is to start small. If you cannot get to net zero if you do not know your supply chain. So you need to understand your suppliers and their suppliers. And if you can't understand that, if you can't obtain that information, you might want to try and find other suppliers that are going to be willing to share these types of claims that you're going to need when it comes to reporting.
I would agree. I think being diligent about the current supply chain that you've got in place, their capabilities, the world that we're living in at the minute, things are going to change. So making sure that supply chain can go along that ride with you. I think that would be my major takeaway. And with the technology, there is solutions out there, whether it's a digitalized business or technology that can support your business. It's finding the right one that suits you.
I would just say buy less stuff and make sure the stuff you buy is good stuff and actually ideally helps the planet and certainly helps people and has social value as well.
Thanks, everybody. Now our time is up. I want everybody actually to take away this one message. I think, to inspire this rapid, deep, and sustained transformation to sustainability. It has to start with everybody in this room. It's not somebody else's job to do that. So I hope by leaving this room, you're inspired, you committed, and you will become a much greener person individually or at your workplace. So thanks very much for joining us. And also, please give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.